For years, the world saw them as a star flawless, untouchable, and always in control. But behind the scenes, they were battling hidden fears, personal struggles, and a life far different from the one the public adored. This is the untold story of a person who learned the hard way that fame isn't everything, and the greatest journey lies in finding peace with who you truly are. What happens when everything you thought you knew about success unravels? This is a story of resilience, reinvention, and the true cost of living in the spotlight. For decades, they lived a life known only to a few, concealed by the flashing lights of stardom. What you don't know about them will surprise you. The person we're about to talk about is someone most people think they know well. Known to millions for their fame, their name has been celebrated in homes, on screens, and in the public's eye. But behind this image of success and laughter, there's another story, a side that very few are aware. Two of this person led two very different lives. On one side, they were the star everyone recognized, admired, and talked about. They appeared on television, made people laugh, and lived a life filled with the luxury and attention that came with fame. Yet, off-screen, their world was nothing like what the public saw. While millions watched them on TV, few knew what happened when the cameras turned off. Behind closed doors, they lived a life driven by passion, hard work, and a love for something entirely different from their public persona. The contrast between their public and private lives was like night and day. To the world, they were the face of entertainment, someone who brought joy to millions. But in reality, there was a quiet side to them, filled with challenges, hobbies, and a level of dedication that most never got to see. Their fame doesn't define the full picture of who they are, and the truth about their real self is more complex than anyone could imagine. As we dive into Tajan, their life, you'll see that what the world believed about them might not be the full truth. Fame doesn't tell the entire story, and sometimes the most remarkable parts of someone's life are the ones that never make it into the spotlight. But what if I told you that behind their fame, there lies a shocking truth that could change everything you thought you knew about them? Before the spotlight, there was only sweat, struggle, and a passion that would soon catch fire. But how did this humble beginning shape the icon they would become? Growing up, they lived in a small, modest home where money was often tight. Their family wasn't rich, but they had everything they needed: love, support, and a strong work ethic. Their father worked hard to provide, while their mother taught them the importance of discipline and honesty. They didn't grow up with silver spoons in their mouths, but instead learned early on that if you wanted something, you had to work for it. From a young age, they had a natural curiosity and a strong desire to learn. They were fascinated by how things worked, whether it was fixing old bikes or taking apart gadgets to understand what made them tick. This curiosity was not just limited to mechanical things, but to people as well. They began to understand the value of hard work and persistence, especially after seeing their parents struggle but never give up. As a child, they spent most of their time outdoors, fixing cars with their father or helping their mother around the house. These early moments didn't seem significant at the time, but they were crucial in shaping the person they would become. The sweat and struggle they experienced on a daily basis taught them that nothing in life came easy. They learned to be patient and persistent, working tirelessly toward any goal they set for themselves. But life wasn't always easy. There were plenty of hardships along the way. Growing up, they had to face the challenges of fitting in and finding their place. They weren't born into wealth or social circles that could guarantee them success. They had to fight for every opportunity, often feeling like they were starting from scratch. There were times when they doubted themselves, wondering if the dream of fame and success was just that, a dream. Despite these challenges, their passion for something greater than themselves kept them going. They were driven by a deep desire to succeed, not just for their own sake, but to prove that anyone could achieve greatness, no matter where they came from. They worked odd jobs, saved money, and put in the effort to learn the craft they were passionate about. They were willing to sacrifice comfort and leisure for the chance to make it. The contrast between their ordinary life and the fame they would eventually achieve was vast. While others spent their days in carefree leisure, they were in the garage, fixing cars, or rehearsing lines, determined to turn their passion into something more. Their life was nothing like the glamorous world they dreamed of, but they knew that one day their hard work would pay off. It wasn't just the hardships that built them, it was a pivotal moment that would set the course for everything that followed. This moment, when they least expected it, would open the doors to the world they had always dreamed of, forever changing their life. In the world of entertainment, a single break can change everything. But what most don't realize is how many nights were spent in the shadows, waiting for that one chance. For the protagonist, the road to success wasn't paved with instant fame or overnight victories. It started with small, unpaid gigs, hours of practice, and countless sacrifices. Their first step into the entertainment world came not in front of thousands, but in front of a handful of people, sometimes just a few friends or strangers in a small, dimly lit bar. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. In those early days, they were just like any other struggling performer. They worked at odd jobs to make ends meet, sometimes doing anything from waiting tables to working in a garage. During the day, they focused on the grind, but at night, they would take to the stage, performing stand-up comedy, playing music, or whatever avenue they could find to showcase their talent. Each night felt like a new beginning, but the exhaustion from balancing two jobs started to take its toll. Still, they didn't complain. They knew the value of hard work, and they were willing to push through the fatigue for the chance to get noticed. It wasn't easy. The competition was fierce, and the doubts were constant. Many nights, they'd step off stage, wondering if anyone even remembered their name, or if their performance had made any impact at all. There were many people with more experience, better connections, or a more polished act. Sometimes, they felt like giving up and just walking away. But deep inside, they knew that giving up wasn't an option. They had a dream, and they were determined to make it come true. One night, while performing at a small club, they had an encounter that would change everything. After their set, a producer from a popular TV show came up to them and said, "You've got something. Keep at it." It was a small comment, but for them, it was everything. It was the first real recognition they had ever received. It wasn't the big break yet, but it was the spark they needed to keep going. They worked even harder after that, refining their craft, networking, and seizing every opportunity. The hours of practice, the missed birthdays, the time spent away from loved ones, and the endless nights of doubt were finally starting to feel worth it. But just as it seemed like success was within reach, something unexpected would threaten everything they had worked for. They would soon face a challenge that could undo everything. The very thing they had struggled for fame wasn't as certain as it seemed. The next chapter of their journey was about to be shaped by an obstacle that would test everything they had learned so far. Fame came faster than they could ever imagine, but with it came new challenges, intense scrutiny, and sacrifices. But could they handle the pressure, or would they crack under the weight? The transition from an unknown performer to a household name happened quickly for the protagonist. After years of grinding in small clubs and chasing every opportunity, the breakthrough moment finally arrived. It was a guest appearance on a popular TV show that skyrocketed them into the spotlight. The night their performance aired, the phone started ringing non-stop, and soon they were being offered more gigs, interviews, and show appearances than they could ever have dreamed of. The first few months were a blur of meetings, rehearsals, and media exposure. Every move they made was covered in tabloids, every word they said was dissected by critics, and the appearance was scrutinized by the public. It was overwhelming at first, but they soon adapted. With fame came the perks, the luxury, the invitations to high-profile events, and the newfound respect from their peers. But the pressure to constantly live up to the public's expectations weighed heavily on them. They were no longer just a person, they had become an image, a product that needed to be maintained. The impact of fame stretched beyond their career. It began to affect their personal life and relationships. Friends they once shared quiet moments with now only saw them through the lens of their public persona. Old relationships began to strain as time became a luxury they couldn't afford. The late nights, the constant travel, and the ever-present cameras meant there was little time left for anything but work. And in the midst of this whirlwind, they began to question whether they were truly happy or just chasing the next milestone. As the fame grew, so did their transformation from a private individual to a public figure. They had always been someone who valued their privacy, but now, every part of their life seemed to be open for discussion. The world was watching, and there was no turning back. They quickly learned how to manage public expectations and put on a smile for the cameras, even when they were struggling behind the scenes. They started to live for the applause, but at times, the applause felt hollow. Fame had given them everything they had wanted, but it also took away parts of themselves they weren't ready to lose. The pressures of fame began to feel unbearable. The relentless media attention, the constant comparison to other stars, and the demands from their fans started to take their toll. Every mistake was magnified, and every failure felt like a personal attack. They began to lose confidence in their own abilities, feeling like they had to constantly prove themselves. The private joy they once had in their craft was now clouded by the need to maintain an image. Despite the success, something deep inside began to shift. The passion that had once driven them now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a never-ending cycle of obligations and expectations. Fame had brought them everything they had dreamed of, but at a cost. Soon, their personal life would spiral into a crisis that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves. The price of fame was becoming clearer, and it was higher than they ever imagined. Behind the bright lights and flashing cameras, the protagonist was hiding a life that few could ever guess. But what were they running from, and what did they truly fear? While the world saw them as a celebrity, admired and adored by millions, there was another side to them, a side they carefully guarded from the public. The bright, glamorous world of fame was just one part of their existence. The other, the part that few knew about, was quiet, personal, and filled with struggles and passions that didn't fit the image they had crafted. For years, they kept this dual life hidden from everyone, even those closest to them. On the outside, they were the perfect celebrity, always smiling, always in control. But inside, they faced moments of doubt and uncertainty. There were passions that drove them, projects they were deeply involved in, but they chose to keep them away from the public eye. Some of these projects were creative, others more personal things that brought them peace, far from the glare of fame. They spent time restoring classic cars, for instance, in a quiet garage far away from the cameras. It was a place where they could lose themselves in the process of creation, far from the expectations of others. But this hidden side wasn't just about hobbies or personal projects. It was about the inner conflict they constantly faced. On one hand, they were expected to be the perfect public figure, charming, talented, and always ready for the spotlight. On the other hand, they were just a person, with flaws, fears, and doubts that they didn't feel comfortable sharing with the world. This constant juggling act became exhausting, and over time, the pressure of maintaining this facade took a toll on them. There were moments when they questioned if it was worth it. The more successful they became, the more distant their true self seemed. They couldn't openly share their struggles with the public, nor could they truly relax and enjoy their success. They were constantly aware of their image, and it made every moment feel like a performance. The weight of the expectations, both from their fans and from themselves, started to feel unbearable. But in those rare moments when they could escape the public eye, they found solace in their hidden passions. These were the things that kept them grounded, that reminded them of who they were before the fame, before the cameras, before the constant noise of the world. Yet, the internal battle between the two worlds, the public persona and the private self, was not without its consequences. There were times when the cracks began to show. A stray comment, a fleeting moment of vulnerability, would slip through the cracks of their controlled persona. The media would pounce, and they would quickly retreat, trying to keep the balance intact. They lived in constant fear that if anyone got too close, they might uncover something they weren't ready to share. It was a delicate dance, and every misstep felt like it could shatter the image they had worked so hard to build. But as the pressures mounted, it became clear that keeping these two worlds apart might not be sustainable for much longer. The gap between who they were in the public eye and who they were in private was beginning to widen. Something had to give. The turning point came when everything they thought they knew about success began to unravel. Was it the end of everything they had worked for? Or the beginning of something far more profound? Everything seemed to be going perfectly until it wasn't. What had once felt like a smooth ride toward success suddenly turned into a bumpy road filled with obstacles they never saw coming. The public image they had so carefully crafted started to fracture, and what followed was a dramatic series of events that would force them to confront their deepest fears. It began with a scandal, something they never imagined would happen to them. A mistake, a moment of weakness, caught on tape, was now everywhere. What had once been a private moment became public knowledge, and the media couldn't get enough of it. The pressure was unbearable. It felt like the world was turning against them, and for the first time, they questioned everything they had worked so hard for. The person they had tried to be for so many years, the flawless, untouchable celebrity, was slipping away. The mistake was not just a public embarrassment, it felt like the end of their career. The internal consequences were just as severe. For the first time, they had to confront their own limitations. They were no longer the person who could juggle fame and their private life. They had built their entire identity around being perfect in the public eye, and now they were forced to look at the cracks beneath the surface. The weight of failure, the fear of losing everything they had worked for, and consumed them. They spent sleepless nights reflecting on their choices, the path that had led them here, and what they had lost along the way. Externally, the fallout was swift. Endorsement deals were pulled, networks distanced themselves, and fans turned away. The very thing they had built, the fame, the recognition, the respect, was starting to crumble. They found themselves isolated, unable to trust those around them. The support they once had felt so strong now seemed fragile, and the fear of being alone in this was overwhelming. It was the ultimate test of their character, and they didn't know if they could come out of it stronger or if they would just disappear into the background. But as the dust began to settle, the protagonist realized something profound. This crisis, as painful as it was, had forced them to strip away the layers of their public persona and confront the real person beneath. The very success they had once prized so highly now seemed insignificant in comparison to the things that truly mattered: personal growth, honesty, and connection. They learned that success wasn't just about fame and admiration. It was about being true to who they were, even if the world didn't always agree with it. This moment reshaped their future choices. Professionally, they chose to take a step back, to rebuild their image not as a perfect celebrity, but as a real person with flaws and struggles, just like everyone else. Personally, they began to open up, to allow themselves to be vulnerable and honest about their journey. They learned the hard way that it was okay to fall, but the key was getting back up and growing stronger because of it. But even as they began to pick up the pieces, another, even bigger challenge awaited them. The world had not forgotten them, and the pressure to regain their place in the spotlight was only getting stronger. Would they rise again, or fall deeper into the chaos? From the ashes of failure, the protagonist would rise again. But could they truly reinvent themselves, or was their past always going to haunt them? After the chaos of the scandal and the loss of everything they had worked for, the protagonist found themselves at a crossroads. For the first time, they were forced to face the reality that their old way of living constantly in the spotlight and under the pressure to be perfect was no longer sustainable. The world had changed, and so had they. But rather than succumb to despair, they decided to take control of their destiny and forge a new path forward. Their comeback wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't immediate. The first step toward reinvention was taking a step back. They left the spotlight and retreated from public life, realizing that the constant exposure and the need to please others had only brought them pain. Instead of focusing on regaining fame, they turned their attention inward, taking time to rediscover what truly mattered to them. They explored new passions, things they had once put aside in the rush of fame. One of those passions was writing. The protagonist had always enjoyed expressing themselves through words, but had never fully embraced it. Now, they poured their heart into a book, one that was raw and vulnerable, telling the story of their own struggles and lessons learned along the way. Alongside writing, they discovered a love for mentoring. They started speaking at small workshops, not as a celebrity, but as someone who had gone through the ups and downs of life. Their message was clear. Failure was not the end, but a part of the journey. They taught others that it was possible to reinvent themselves and rise from the ashes of their mistakes. They found deep satisfaction in helping others find their way, realizing that this new direction brought them a sense of fulfillment that fame never had. Reinvention wasn't without its challenges. The emotional toll of failure still lingered. Every time they put themselves out there, whether through writing, speaking, or just living a quieter life, they feared being judged for their past mistakes. The weight of their previous fame still hung over them, and at times, they doubted if they could truly start fresh. They had built a new identity, but the memories of the past would never be completely erased. The mental and emotional strain was often overwhelming, and there were nights when they questioned if they had made the right choice. Physically, the toll of years spent under constant pressure also showed. They found themselves exhausted, not just from the demands of fame, but from the emotional baggage they had carried for so long. Healing took time, and it wasn't just about rebuilding their career, it was about rebuilding themselves. They had to confront the parts of themselves that had been hidden for so long, the insecurities, the self-doubt, and the need for external validation. It was a process of growth that required them to be honest with themselves and accept their imperfections. Despite the struggles, they began to see the fruits of their labor. Their book became a success, not because of their fame, but because it resonated with people. Their words, filled with honesty and vulnerability, connected with others who had faced their own setbacks. The protagonist found peace in knowing that their true value wasn't tied to the public's perception of them, but to the real, authentic person they had become. But just when it seemed like everything was falling into place, the past would come rushing back with a vengeance. The very fame they had tried to leave behind seemed to follow them, dragging them back into the limelight. Old connections resurfaced, and the media was once again interested in the story of the fallen star making a comeback. This time, though, it wasn't just about their past mistakes. It was about their redemption. Would they be able to handle the pressure, or would it all crumble again? As the years passed, their story became one of legend. But what does true success really mean? And as they looked back, what was it that mattered the most? The protagonist's journey had come full circle. From the heights of fame to the depths of personal crisis, and finally to the slow, steady rebuilding of their life, they had lived a life that many would call remarkable. Their impact on the industry was undeniable. They had entertained millions, influenced countless others, and left a mark on the world that would last far beyond their time in the spotlight. Yet, As they reflected on all that they had achieved, they couldn't help but wonder, was all the fame, the applause, and the recognition truly worth it? Over the years, the protagonist had come to realize that success wasn't about the size of the crowd or the number of accolades. Fame had once seemed like the ultimate goal, the thing that would fill the emptiness they had felt inside. But now, standing on the other side of their career, they saw it differently. Fame had brought them countless opportunities, but it had also taken much from them. It had cost them their privacy, their peace of mind, and sometimes even their sense of self. They had spent years chasing after something that, in the end, felt hollow. Success, as they had learned, was not defined by the number of people who admired you, but by the way you lived your life, the impact you had on others, and the peace you found within yourself. Over time, they had found greater joy in the quieter moments, the simple pleasure of a book, the satisfaction of a job well done, and the fulfillment that came from giving back to others. They had learned that the true value of their life wasn't measured by their public image, but by the people they helped, the lessons they learned, and the legacy they would leave behind. Personal growth had been an ongoing process. In the early days of fame, they had been blinded by the lights and the allure of success. But as they navigated the later years of their career, they began to understand what really mattered. They learned to embrace their flaws, to let go of the need for validation, and to focus on living authentically. They had evolved from a person who sought external approval to one who found peace in their own company. This transformation was perhaps their greatest achievement, one that no amount of fame or recognition could have provided. As they reflected on the years that had passed, they asked themselves, what was the cost of their success? Had it been worth it? They could never fully answer these questions, but one thing was clear. They had learned to live with both the rewards and the sacrifices. Fame had given them much, but it had also taught them valuable lessons in humility, resilience, and self-awareness. But just when you think their story is complete, a final chapter begins to unfold, one that no one saw coming. A new challenge, more personal than ever, was about to test everything they had learned. Would they be able to handle it? Or would this final twist rewrite their legacy? After a lifetime of highs and lows, they reached a place of peace. But the greatest lesson of all was one they learned not in the spotlight, but in the quiet moments of reflection. The protagonist's journey was filled with challenges, setbacks, and moments of triumph. From the early days of struggling in obscurity to the dizzying heights of fame and the painful fall that followed, they had experienced it all. But through it all, they discovered something much more valuable than fame: the power of resilience, the importance of staying true to oneself, and the freedom that comes from embracing one's flaws and imperfections. Their story wasn't just about success or failure. It was about finding balance, navigating the complexities of life, and realizing that true peace doesn't come from external validation, but from within. They learned that the greatest rewards aren't the accolades or the recognition, but the ability to live authentically and without fear of judgment. The moments of silence, the personal growth, and the lessons learned through hardship were the real treasures they carried with them. As viewers or readers reflect on their journey, there's a powerful message to take away. No matter how many times life knocks you down, it's how you rise that defines you. Resilience, authenticity, and passion are the foundations of a meaningful life. Life's greatest challenges often lead to its greatest rewards, and finding peace means accepting yourself fully, no matter where you are in your journey. In the end, the question remains: what will you take away from this story of two worlds colliding, and how will it change the way you view your own life?